All right, I'm Torstein. I work for the Labor and Welfare Administration, NAV. I'm head of the Test Center of Excellency. And the introduction, I think, is sufficient, so let's just go forward and look at where we were like 2 years ago. This is a story of a journey, so I need to set, where we were. Some of this is still true. 19,000 users internally and millions logged on users from outside the company. One third of our national budget run through our system. Quite a heavy operation just in that. A lot of employees, and as you can see, there were almost 2 employees to every consultant. So consultant-heavy operation we had 2 or 3 years ago. 300 to 400 systems, and I think we had every platform invented, from mainframe to cloud. We had a plan, build, run way of doing things. We had Waterfall methodology, and we built everything in projects. And the projects were mainly staffed by consultants. So that's where we came from. And I'm going to go through 7 areas which I think is interesting for this story to tell. First area is our identity as a company. We thought that our mission was to execute the governmental laws and directives, the pension rules, the sick leave rules, and we were supposed to be experts on that, which meant that we couldn't be experts on IT, we thought. We thought that the best programs is where programming is doing, in the marketplace. That consultancy firms, they had programmers. They should be the best at that. We should hire them. They should be the best. So we believed that that was a way to get the best programmer. Just buy them. We also believed in the flexibility. We need to scale up when we built big stuff and scale down when we built not that much. And we are government, so you can't hire and fire. So we believed in the flexibility. Buy the stuff. And we also believed in this notion that if you play the market, you get clever contracts and clever deals. So we had this system, this thing we should build, and we put the offer out there, and 2 consultancy firms, bid on it to get the best, so that we could get the best price. And I think we fooled ourselves a lot there. So every system had a contract, and everything was contract based. And this does things to you, because these clever contracts, they are just a set of complex rules, and complex rules gives you stupid behavior. Simple rules gives you intelligent behavior. And I mean, that's an introduction to the agile thinking, I guess. And these contracts, they were a set of game rules. We wanted to measure everything so that we can control our contracts and so that we can make sure that we got bang for the buck. And they wanted to have huge estimation models so that they made sure that they got paid for everything they did. And in the end, we ended up like an hours of programming costing us 5,000 euros because you had all this overhead. And we thought we were, doing good because we had full control. But control costs you a lot. So these contracts and this way of rigging things like big projects, and at the end we do acceptance testing, full value chain, regression testing. We have to make sure that these cocky programmers from the consultancy firms didn't destroy anything in their urge to finish early, etc. So we had huge tests at the end of this. And this testing was all about finding the errors, proving that we got what we paid for. Our role in testing turned into some kind of a distrust function. And that did something to us. That, mentally, that made us into something which is not productive, I think. So the learning point from this, being an IT company or not, using contracts or not, I think if you have unique systems, like if you're in the business of writing stuff, your system is Word. Does anybody produce Word somewhere? Yes, they do. Does anybody, are they better at making Word? Yes, they are. So let them make Word. But when you're doing pensions in the socialist country in Norway, our rules are not implemented anywhere else. So this is a system that only we can build. So we should build it ourselves. We should have the competency to build it. So then we started thinking, let's build competency. Let's make sure that the skill stays. So we have to have focus on our own community, and above all, avoid these fixed-priced contracts. So the truth that we killed where we are not an IT company, yes, indeed, we are an IT company. It's definitely we're an IT company. And then the testing, which we thought was all about finding bugs. Of course, that's not true. Everybody here in this room knows that, but I'm not too sure we knew that for sure when we rigged these huge test projects. And then another thing I'd like to talk about is how we rig things in projects. Our owners and a lot of people from the business side, they thought that code is a piece of machinery, and when you buy it, you install it, and it runs forever. And if you need something changed, you buy that change and you install it, and it runs forever. So in the mindset that code is something solid, that when bought and installed runs forever, the thinking is logic. Let's do it in projects because they are time boxed, and you know what you buy and you know what you get, and you have control of what they're doing and what they are. So the project logic came from that thinking, I think. It also came from the financing. So we want to achieve something, we need some money, and then you need to make sure that you get what you paid for. So the money is put into a project, so it starts and stops, and it's all very well defined. It seems like it's all defined. And then you get all the complexity. Projects that have, a substantial size build complexity. As Pete said in the morning lecture today, there's a lot of complexity because you don't focus on complexity in projects. Projects focus on other stuff. And in this complexity, our test managers became more and more like project managers because they had to handle all these deliverables, all these coordination. And our expertise in planning and coordination grew, and if your tool is a hammer, then everything turns into a nail. And we started solving everything with more coordination and more planning. But projects, they are an entity that is all about activities, isn't it? We start here and we finish it, and it's all about activity. And it's all about measuring the activity and reporting the activity. And when the activity is done, your project is done. So, you lose the concept of your customer, your value creation, adjusting your solution early so that you get the right solution and not just building it the right way. Projects are also like contracts. They become this isolated entity with their own life. Sometimes it gets its own awareness. We are there for the project, to deliver the project in time and on budget. Projects are creating handovers, so you separate what's being built from who's running it. Projects are brilliant for the thinking someone else's problem. When I'm done, leaving it to others. So I think our experience on projects was that it's the worst thing ever for Agile in our business. So we started absolutely not doing things in projects. They create complexity. Also, they focus on these formal things, which happened to us in test. We were very focused on our roles, on our responsibilities, on phases, on doing things right. Not necessarily doing the right thing, but doing things right. Separation of roles, separation of responsibilities. So we became very rigid, very formal, very much based on deciding and being the decision point for going forward and not. And that made us focusing on what we did, the things we did, the testing, and not that much focusing on our clients and the product. So the learning factors was projects doesn't work for software delivery at NAV. I know projects work for a lot of things, but at NAV that was our conclusion. It's not a good thing for software delivery, especially if you want to do agile. And project is not a remedy for complexity, because what you do in projects is that you plan and you coordinate. And if you run into complexity problems, you just plan and coordinate more. We had these acceptance tests, and finally ready for acceptance tests. Let's start testing. Full value chain testing. That's how it looked like. Every time we started our huge acceptance test at the end of the project, we had 8 weeks of acceptance tests. The first 2 weeks was always like that, almost. A lot of wasted time. So when you do things in huge chunks, you end up wasting a lot of time, and that's what projects did to us. We had these extensive acceptance tests and regression tests at the end. And to make sure that we managed all that, we had a huge test rig. We had testers, we had planners, we had coordinators, and we had project managers, and we had sub-projects for the test, and etc. And this rig was very costly. So when the delivery of the work is very costly, you think, so much cost involved in just testing this. Let's put more code into it so we can have, the economy of scale here, which just made it even more complex and more horrible. So instead of thinking we have to grow smaller, we started thinking we have to grow bigger to make sure that we can exploit all this power we have in testing and planning and coordination. But anyway, the same story as I mentioned earlier. We became very rigid, very formal. Our roles became formal. We had this authority to stop things. We were the guardians of quality. And we became the almighty tollgate. To make sure this was done correctly all over, we made our own methodology, quite a big one, huge one, extensive, detailed one. We became this central unified function that decided rules and made everybody follow these rules. But this is about release size, and the release size was the problem here. And was that right one? Yes. Risk is always about consequence and probability, isn't it? And we thought that the only way to avoid risk was to test extensively and make sure that the probability was 0. And this guy, high probability in what he's doing, and there's a high consequence if things goes wrong. I felt that our projects was like that sometimes. It was a huge chunk, high probability of this going wrong, and there's a high consequence when things go wrong. So when we started thinking about this formula, risk equals consequence times probability, and someone said, let's release in smaller batches. That takes away the consequence. So then you can have a high risk but low consequence. So the whole idea here is just to get away from the thinking that you have to reduce risk to 0, reduce probability to 0, and start thinking about reduce the consequence. And that's about release size. Small releases takes the risk out of it. Also, the small release makes you makes it possible to ask the users, get feedback, minimum viable products, etc. But then you have smaller sizes. I'm just mentioning, it took us 2 years to sell this. So truly, it took us 2 years to sell this logic with the business side and our owners, because they were so obsessed with what we did earlier, and they had been raised in this logic that it took us, like 20 million kroners just to rig this project, and testing was costly and had to be done extensively. So all this logic was in our marrows. But this formula was the solution. So that's the formula you have to use if you want to persuade your business side to go into smaller release sizes. When you're smaller release sizes, you have less formality, less rigid stuff. You start working in smaller batches, and quality becomes more of everybody's concern, because you can't lean to the tester and deliver things to the testers. Everybody has to be involved. So that changed things for us. Quality is everybody's concern, yes, and that means we lost our role as guardians. Our formal role was now not the same role anymore. Now it was everybody's role to make sure that quality was built and quality was part of everybody's thinking. We had to start trusting others, because we couldn't do all the testing ourselves. We had to, trust automated tests, even trust the consultants. Horrible as it sounds, we had to trust them. Even programmers were trusted at this. And that's a good thing. So the formula is a good thing. It helps you share responsibility. And then you can't do all the testing yourself. You have to distribute and differentiate. You can't do the same testing every time. Sometimes this type of testing, sometimes that type of testing. So what we learned is that earlier on the targets must be 0 errors. No, it doesn't have to be. And someone must be responsible for quality. No, everybody is responsible for quality. If you have someone responsible for quality, even by having someone with their name, quality, on their tag, doesn't that imply that someone else is less responsible for quality? That's the way we started thinking. So by putting a quality tag on something or someone, you imply that someone else is less responsible for quality. So we started thinking, no, everybody's responsible, instead of someone must be responsible. And then let's talk about continuous delivery. We had this role, and we had this thinking that if you put something into production, it's risky. We had proved that over and over again. Putting things to production is very risky, and it's very costly, and it has to do. We have to do weeks of testing. And in all this risk, we have to do handovers. Handovers is good, we thought. Handovers is a way to professionalize ourselves. So if I make sure that I give something to you, and you measure me and control me and check that I have done everything I'm supposed to do, we get this professional relationship. It's good for quality. It's just bollocks. Separation of roles is a very important part of the test theories that I've read. Someone else should test someone else's work. And it is a good thing, but when you formalize it too much, it becomes a bad thing. So I'm not going to be too black and white on this separation of roles, whether it's good or not, but in our instance, it didn't do well for us, and we did too much separation of roles and too much focus on these formal handovers. So we were a third party then, making sure the handover was doing being a good handover from the project to the operations. And as a unit, a part of the business, what happens to you when you feel that you're not a part of the programmers, you're not a part of the product builders, and you're not a part of the operations either. You're a third party. You're someone else sitting outside, checking that everything goes all right. That does something to you. Our identity was outside product building. We were not part of product building, in a way. So that isolated us in a way, I think. Having this third-party role did something to our integrity and our identity as a unit in the company. Also, these huge batches of delivery, these big projects, customers didn't see much change on a regular basis. And then we started doing small releases, and then we came to the customers with, yeah, you mentioned this button yesterday, I fixed it. And our users coming from this old world, realizing this new world, it was a pleasure seeing them. Is this button really mine? Did you fix this for me? I asked you yesterday. It was a change in everything. when we started small things and they got things they asked for the day after. This little fellow here reminds me of the feedback we got from our users in the beginning. Can it be true? Did you fix this for me already? Yes, we did, because it's just a small thing and we release it immediately. And that's what continuous does to you. You can release often and you can get feedback often. And then our thinking here was that building it right is more important than building the right thing is more important than building it right. And that's what continuous releases and small releases does to you. You can get continuous feedback on what you're doing. And then again, back to the continuous and the formal handovers. You can't do any handovers and formal stuff if you're continuously working and releasing. So all of that was lost, and nobody misses it. It was just waste of work. We just realized that all these handovers didn't actually produce any more quality. So our testers and test people, test managers, we developed technical skills. So we had this role or this skill we call technical testers. They now integrate with the teams. They're part of the teams. And that's the only way to manage work if you're working in a continuous fashion. Within the team, you can't even have handovers within the team. Let's say you have a team of about 5 or 8 people, and one of them is a test expert. The team can't wait for this person to be available for testing, because that means you're slowing the team down. Or if this test person is in a period where there's nothing to test, because the programs are working on something else, you can't just sit there and wait for stuff or read Facebook. Then you have to find yourself something else that is useful. And this change altered the way we were thinking about skill sets and handovers. So to avoid internal handovers, everybody has to do a little bit of everything. The programs has to test, and the testers has to program. Why not? Also, the continuous testing led us to shift left and shift right, of course. We had our test people being a lot more involved with the program, product managers, defining user stories, using, like, for instance, Invest framework for better user stories. They were involved in design work. Also, they were part of defining what should we measure. Performance testing. If we release a little bit here and a little bit there, we can do performance testing in production, couldn't we? Just measure the right stuff, measure the right transactions. So if you go in and measure in production, you can avoid a lot of testing. So by shifting left and right, you can test just enough, test cleverly, without risking your releases. But again, that did a lot to our organization, our test people. We started by thinking we were test people because what we did defined who we were. And then we realized that, hey, we're into quality. So we went from being test people to quality people, even though we didn't call ourselves we are in charge of quality. But we realized that we are in the business of quality, really. And I mentioned the internal handovers. Don't do it. Shift left and right. So the truth we killed there was that testing in itself ensures quality. No, it doesn't. There's a lot more to it. And the other truth we killed was that handover is a quality measure. I've said enough about that. So let's just move on. Everybody has seen the tester when he's given the message, your test environment is for the time being up and running. We had test environments going down all the time, these complex value chains. And from time to time, they were actually up and running. And I feel this is the way our testers reacted whenever the environment was up and running. We had about 30 test environments, and they were almost complete. They were full of data sets that were synchronized. We had to make sure all the applications were at the same release level, etc. A huge job in getting all these test environments. And we believe that test environments was a constraint to our production. We thought that with more complete test environments, we could produce more code. That was our true belief. And our test people, they became very competent in handling these test environments with lack of data, lack of the right versions, etc., etc. But what that did to us was that covered up the real problem, because when you have complexity, the symptoms are things go wrong, for instance, when you test. And that's the symptom. And if you start covering up that by making sure that all the data is correct, and all the work you have to do to make your test environment better, you're just covering up for the real problem, which is that you're building complex stuff and you're not reducing complexity. We had to enforce fewer test environments, and enforce was the solution here. We had to like go in with management and executive power and say we're cutting test environments, because then you get pain-driven development in the team. It's pain not having all these test environments that someone else manages for you. So what they did was then they started to reduce complexity, reduce the test development, test dependencies, etc., etc. So that's one way to get the programmers involved in reducing complexity, both in the application and in test dependencies. And what this meant for us was that, well, we did some measurements earlier on, and we found that 70% of the errors were not application errors. There were errors in data and versions and environment. And when we got to this stage, virtually 70% of the errors disappeared. That's something for you, or your managers. And all at the cost of having less environments, which also saved money. But there was a lot of investment in handling this. Number of test environments, constraint for software development. I mentioned that. I have to speed up now. Okay, another thing was, I've mentioned this, that we were agents of distrust, I felt, sometimes. Our job was to discover errors. The legal contracts that we had, all we wanted to do was to make sure that we discovered the faults that they did, because then we could use the contracts to say you have to fix it for your own cost. But routines and checklists and reporting and managers coming in, checking what you did, making sure you did it right, all that is also mechanisms of distrust. When you have a hierarchy, when you have to send stuff up to get approval downwards again, that's it's a signal of distrust. So the early formal testing thinking was in many ways agents of distrust. It creates winners and losers and us and them and all that. So we started thinking that you have to trust the program, you have to trust the contractor, and you have to remove all these distrust functions. So we took away all the way as much as formality as we could take away, and that changed a lot as well in how we thought and how we worked. But to increase trust, you have to praise mistakes, you have to take away all the barriers, you have to take away contracts. We have so many teams and so many examples where we took away the contract and say, well, the contract should be actually 3 lines. I hire you for that price, for that length of time. That's the contract. You're a part of the team. We trust you. And things started to go so well. It did a lot to us. So to sum it all up, when we have this realization that we have unique systems, we realize we are not an IT company. It's not very test-related part of not test-related subject really, but it did a lot to our way of thinking in IT, and that we are an IT company. We have to have proper test function, not just verifying contracts, which was the test function we had earlier on. And projects kill agility. Contracts kill agility. We have to release small and continuously. and few test environments is a key factor to achieving a lot of this. Trust, finally, and most important, I think, is part of getting quality in your team. So a little bit of the journey. How much time I've got left? Keep going. That's a good answer. So a little bit of our journey here. So the role of the Test Center of Excellency. Initially, we started with, we were performing functions and processes. We were formal about that. And now we are more towards agents challenging the organization. So we're not performing specified tasks and checking them off when they're done. We are more part of the team, and we are challenging the organization. And to challenge the organization, we need a lot of skills. So we have to build more skills, not just the depth and the expertise, but also wider set of expertise. Also, to challenge the organization, we need integrity. We need to be part of the team, not a separate entity, group of experts sitting on their high chairs, judging other teams. So being part of the team, building a lot of skills, makes us more challengers, and makes us able to challenge the organization and challenge the team. That's the change of the role. And then our formal authority was very high. We were the gatekeepers. Now our formal authority is low, but I'm not saying that our authority is low. Our informal authority is based on our skills and our integrity and the value we create in the teams. So I'm not saying that's low. That's quite high, but that depends on where you are and who you are, etc. But as a unit within our company, our TCO has changed from high to low, the formal authority. And our identity, as I mentioned, we started as we are test, and then we are quality. We even started thinking about calling ourselves something with quality in the name, as I mentioned. Now we are product builders, just as everybody else. Our expertise is something test-related, but this guy is security expertise, and this guy is a database expertise, and this is a front end. So we all have expertise, but what we are here for is not our expertise. We are here for building products to the customers. So by taking away your identity, no, not taking away, but taking away the part of your identity that says that you're something outside product building and outside creating value to the user, I think that's important to take away those things. We are here for the users, and we're building product, and that should be our identity. And that's the same thing with where was our home? Our home was the Test Center of Excellency. That was where we went. We were home there. But now our home is the team, which is much better because, as I mentioned, that's where we belong. Our skills, we were specialists in test. We went to conferences just to learn more about tests. Test. We read books about test. Test was in our heads. But that's just a specialty. Our role now and our competence now should be broader because you need to apply your competency cleverly in the team. And you're more useful to the team if you have a broader skill set. But test should still be your specialization. So we are potatoes and we are advisors, more than we are these formal specialists that do roles defined in the project handbook. And then we started by initially saying that we cannot trust, and the journey is the same there. We do have to trust. We have to build trust. So also, we started thinking that 5 minutes left. We started thinking that as we empower the teams, and our role is not only challenging but spreading knowledge. But as you spread knowledge, spread skills, spread competency, and empower the teams, they can do testing. They can do a lot of the stuff that only testers did before. We started thinking that maybe not all teams need a tester. Some teams can do well without a tester. Some teams, programmers, can learn the necessary testing skills your product owners. The team itself can do all necessary quality work. Some teams working on products that just cannot fail. I mean, if you're paying out pensions millions of kroners every day, you cannot fail. So you have to think differently. You have to differentiate on what your system is doing. But most teams don't actually need a tester or a test person or a test manager or a technical tester. They can do well without. And as I wrote this presentation, I was thinking, and I was saying to myself, this is actually not a presentation about testing, is it? This is a presentation about software development. So, I mean, that also is describing our journey at NAV. We went from being very focused about ourselves and tests and test and test and test into now, actually, what we're doing is software development. And that's it.